Hello everyone, hope you're doing alright. So let's take a quick look at the DPS rankings as they stand right now in 7.1, specifically for Endgame PvE. Now, this is just a brief reminder, this is just a silly list on the internet. You can play whatever you want to play. I'm not going to stop you. This is just a high-level look at how the specs are performing in PvE based on, are they doing damage? Do they have raid utility? Or do they just, not survive because they don't have the defensive cooldowns? So, second brief disclaimer here, this is all subject to change based on 7.1.1. If you see a little asterisk next to the title, that means that there's probably going to be a major change coming that might impact where the spec falls on the list. So let's get started down here in cringe tier. Starting off, we have lethality and concealment. Both of these specs just don't have the defensive cooldown to survive. Lethality is slightly better than concealment is, but without any AoE DR full stop, operative specs just kind of die in endgame PvE. It's a real pain in the neck to keep them alive, and so that's why I had to live down here at the bottom of cringe tier. Also, IO and Arsenal have to live down here in cringe tier for similar reasons. We have one defensive cooldown and not much else. Without any AoE DR, it's kind of sad. And then finally, we have marksmanship and sharpshooter down here. It does no damage. That's it. Moving on into tier, we have Deception and Infiltration. Deception and Infiltration has fine utility and good defensive cooldowns, but it's so one single-minded focused where it's just straight up single target burst. You don't get any advantage out of Deception and Infiltration CC because it's raiding, so you don't have a lot of stun capabilities here. It can play a role in a spec, but people are gonna go anytime you bring it to raid, mostly because it's not hatred. That's the primary downside of Deception right now, is that if you're bringing Deception, it means you're not bringing Hatred, which is kind of a throw. In a similar vein, Madness and Balance does okay damage. It has okay defensive cooldowns. It has okay burst potential. It has okay kind of everything. It also is very immobile, which is very sad in any endgame PvE content. So both of these specs are going to live in kind of like the tier, as of like, you could have probably brought a better spec to raid, but you're probably not going to be kicked out of a raid team for bringing it. So fortunately, those are the only specs that are kind of questionable when it comes to endgame PvE. The bottom of like actually good tier here, all these specs are perfectly playable. If you bring these to any PvE party, no one's going to complain because they're all pretty solid right now. Starting off with Fury and Carnage, they do a bunch of damage and they have more defensive cooldowns, and Pred is very, very nice. So they're in a really solid place right now. I'd hate to see them change. Lightning and TK have kind of a similar thing going on where they have great burst damage. You can have some cleave, not a whole bunch though. Decent defensive cooldowns, and it can be very mobile if you play it the right way. So that's why I have it up here in low yay tier, but that is subject to change based on the nerfs they could be receiving in the upcoming patch. AP and Tactics are just super single target burst specs with the added advantage of having rebounders and being extremely mobile compared to like Deception. So that's why it lives up here. It also just does like straight up more damage. It's also very simple to play. So this spec can play a lot of roles in any given raid team, and people really aren't going to complain about you showing up with it. Vengeance and Rage kind of have both a fantastic set of defensive cooldowns. Vengeance, if there's any AoE at all, play Vengeance 24/7, like that's just the way to go. Rage does acceptable single target damage, good defensive cooldowns. They all have that little bit of taunt utility, so that way if you need to, you can do some mechanics. So very good specs overall, no one will complain if you bring it. And then finally, Engineering and Virulence are both acceptable range DPS specs right now. I really like Engineering. Engineering is teetering on the edge of being in the upper echelons. It just doesn't have the same amount of pumping as the other specs do, but built-in AoE, and as a sniper, if you die to any AoE mechanics, you're just bad. All right, Entrench is fantastic. You basically cannot die to any AoE that goes out as a sniper. It's a really good time. And Shield is fantastic. You have a surprising amount of mobility, especially with Engineering. So that's why these specs live in good tier. They're doing really well. But wrapping us up at the top of the list here, these three specs. Annihilation, for one, straight up damage, fantastic. Raid heals, fantastic. Pred, Mar defensive cooldowns, fantastic. It's just a fantastic spec. If anyone complains about you showing up on Annihilation and Watchmen, they're an idiot and you stop listening to them, okay? It's just probably the best spec in the game in terms of PvE right now. Hatred and Serenity for the burn phase is fantastic. It has natural cleave that you can use pretty easily. Decent defensive cooldowns, especially with that AoE DR. It's kind of a spec that's built for PvE DPS, which is really a difference compared to PvP. So fantastic. Would not recommend enough that you bring Hatred and Serenity if you are going to take a Sin into raid. And finally, Pyro and Plasma Tech, just straight up damage. Straight up damage, straight up damage, straight up damage. This spec will pump on single target, on and cleave all the time. There's not really much you have to change about your AoE and single target rotation, which is where it kind of shines over Venge and Vig, because with Vengeance you have to choose either AoE or single target. Pyro and Plasma just pumps all the time, every single time. Great mobility, rebounders is fantastic, and surprisingly good survivability too, especially with those extra cultos you get. So that's kind of a high level look of what specs you should be bringing to raid, or what specs you might want to leave in the locker room for a little while here. You can play any of these specs on the list. I still bring IO and Arsenal to raid because I like playing them, and my team is, good enough to carry me through it. However, if you are looking to get into high-end raiding and you're like, what specs should I really be bringing? Hopefully this gives you an idea of what you can or possibly should not bring. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, conundrums, etc., leave them down in the comment section below. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. But that is all that I have. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. Enjoy yourselves, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye-bye.